Wala naman kasi talaga akong ginawang mali. Pero kung sa tingin nila meron man, dalhin nila kung saan, dalhin nila sa impeachment, dalhin nila sa korte, sasagutin namin. Yun. Kaya ako very casual kasi masasagot ko kasi lahat ng sasabihin nila. Minsan lang, hindi ako nagsasalita. Kaya mukha siyang walang sagot. Kasi minsan, ayoko na rin na magsalita kasi nakakapagod na sila. Nakakapagod yung galit nila actually. Yun yung nakakapagod. Pero kung meron kayong kaaway, maasahan ako. Tawagin ninyo ako. Basta away, maasahan talaga ako.
Hello po mga ka-viral, panibagong update ulit tayo. Pinagpiestahan pa rin ng taong bayan ang isyu na ibinabato ng taga-kongreso kay VP SARAH Duterte hinggil sa di umano'y illegal na paggamit ng confidential funds ng Vice Presidente nung ito ay DepEd Secretary pa ito. Subalit matapang naman na sinagot ni VP SARAH ang lahat ng mga akusasyon sa kanya na aniya ay galit at personal na interes ang dahilan kung bakit siya pinag-iinitan. Ayon kay VP SARAH ay nakakapagod di umano ang maparatang sa kanya dahil wala naman siyang ginawang mali. Hindi di umano siya uurong, bagkus haharap siya sa korte kung sakali man at doon niya ilalahad-lahat ng dapat niyang sasabihin. Dagdag pa niya ay maaasahan di umano siya sa pakikipaglaban at pakikipag-away sa kasinungalingan at pamemersonal. Naging hati naman ang saloobin ngayon ng taong bayan hinggil sa isyong ito. Mayroong nagnanais na isulong ang impeachment laban kay VP SARAH upang malaman kung guilty ito sa misuse ng confidential funds. Subalit marami naman ang sumusuporta sa Vice Presidente at naniniwala na nais lamang nilang sisirain si VP SARAH dahil sa natatakot lamang sila. Natatakbo ito sa darating na 2028 presidential elections lalo na at marami ang taga-suporta ng mga Duterte. Narito ang bahagi ng pagsisiyasat ng Kamara hinggil sa di umano'y katiwalian ng Vice Presidente hinggil sa paggamit ng confidential funds.
Dinidirekta ng ating Vice President or then Secretary of Education ang kanyang team para i-prepare ang disbursement voucher. Kanang kamay niya, it must be noted, Mr. Chair, na kanang kamay niya dito sa DepEd ay si Attorney Sunshine Fajarda na siyang asawa naman ng DepEd Special Disbursing Officer na si Mr. Edward Fajarda. Ang Chief Accountant po ng DepEd na si Ms. Rina Catalan ang siyang nagsucertify naman kung available na ang cash and yung completion po ng documents. And once everything is in order, si Ms. Annalyn Sevilla po, Undersecretary for Finance, approves the check for payment. Pinipirmahan naman po ito ni Ms. Sevilla at ni Gloria Mercado, siyang dalawang authorized signatories ng DepEd. After which, Mr. Edward Fajarda bilang SDO ang siyang tumutungo sa Land Bank at nag-e-encash ng mga checking ito. Similar to the OVP, the DepEd key individuals in the preparation and disbursement of confidential funds are those who have been familiar with the Vice President even before she assumed office. They were all with her when she was mayor of Davao City. Like Ms. Gina Acosta, Mr. Fajarda is the SDO entrusted to disburse the confidential funds to different recipients. And also, much like Ms. Acosta, binibigay rin po niya, according sa kanyang statement, ang 37.5 million na kanyang na-encash na confidential funds each time sa security officer ng DepEd. Might I say, unlawfully niyang binibigay ito. At the end of the day, sino nga po ba talaga ang nakakaalam ng lahat ng ito? Dahil hindi nakakasagot ang SDO, syempre, ang nakakaalam lang po ng lahat ng ito ay ang DepEd Secretary dati na si Vice President SARAH Duterte. At katulad din po ng OVP, marami rin pong katanungan patungkol sa confidential funds ng DepEd. Maraming mga kaduda-dudang acknowledgement receipts na hindi tayo sigurado sa kinapuntahan. Mga acknowledgement receipts na mukha namang pare-parehas ang nagsusulat. Mga liquidation reports na mukhang mabilisan lamang na ginagawa, copy-paste nga lamang. Ang mga tao who have supposedly used and benefited from the use of confidential funds completely denied na nagamit nila ito. AFP commanders under oath ay sinabing kung alam lang sana nila na gagamitin ang mga certifications just to justify expenditure of the confidential funds, hindi sana nila i-issue ang certifications na ito. And on top of this, mukhang ang SDO ng DepEd ay marunong pala mag-teleport, Mr. Chair, dahil in one day, nakaka-disperse po siya ng funds mula Apari po hanggang Hulo. Based sa pahayag ni Major General Nolasco Mempin, kung naaalala ng ating mga colleagues, nung na-issuehan ang DepEd ng Audit Observation Memorandum ng COA o AOM, ang Secretary ng Education asked him certification from the AFP. Under those instructions, he requested and was given these certifications for the youth leadership summits conducted by the AFP. Klaro po, walang DepEd confidential funds na nakarating sa AFP. Itong mga certification ng AFP ay ginamit lamang upang makasumite ang DepEd sa COA ng kanilang kinakailangang dokumento. They just used the AFP certifications to justify and explain their supposed 15 million in confidential funds representing rewards to informers. Katulad din po sa OVP, napakaraming maanomalyang acknowledgement receipts ng DepEd. I will be showing on the screen right now acknowledgement receipts of persons with almost the exact same stroke ng pagpirma. In fact, hindi man halos mabasa dun sa pangalawang pangalan, hindi halos mabasa yung panunulat nung gumawa nito. Sa slide naman, sa susunod na slide natin, meron din namang pong mga individual na 2 beses nakatanggap. Ito si Milky Sequoia na pinakilala sa atin kanina. 2 beses po siya makakatanggap sa DepEd, pero magkaiba po ang pirma sa unang Milky Sequoia sa pangalawang Milky Sequoia. Meron din naman po tayong acknowledgement receipts na kung saan ang confidential funds ay na-disburse on the same day on completely different locations. Dito po makikita natin nag-disburse ang DepEd sa Makati at sa Cebu on the same day, March 4, 2023. Lastly, similar to her role in the OVP, then DepEd Secretary SARAH Duterte, siya din po ang pumirma ng certification and accomplishment reports of DepEd attesting that the funds were used in accordance with the law. These certifications were made under oath, again, as said by Congresswoman Luistro, before a notary public, notarized by a attorney, Rochelle Abella. Nanumpa po ang ating Vice Presidente, Mr. Chair, na ang confidential funds na ginamit ay naayon sa batas, pero sa ating dinami-daming hearing na pinagdaanan, mukha naman po talagang hindi ganoon ang nangyari. Maraming salamat po, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Congresswoman Pami Zamora. The Chair would like to, before I recognize the Honorable Ortega, the Chair would like to recognize the Vice Chairperson from the 7th District of Cavite, the Honorable Crispin Diego Ping Remulla. Good afternoon, sir. The Chair would like to recognize the Honorable Francisco Pau Ortega.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bago po tayo magtuloy, Mr. Chair, may I would like to manifest and request at the same time that the Secretariat prepare and play our Balik Tanaw video for the committee, Mr. Chair.
September 4, 2023 nang unang questionin ng Senate Finance Committee ang Confidential and Intelligence Fund ng Office of the Vice President.
One of my main subjects of debate with the OVP na yung Confi and Intel funds mas properly lodged talaga dun sa ibang line items ng opisina mismo o sa mga intelligence agencies talaga.
November 9, 2023 sa Senate Budget Deliberation, tuluyan ang inurong ng Office of the Vice President ang paghingi ng confidential fund.
We're in receipt of a statement from the Vice President we discussed earlier. And according to her, they will no longer pursue the CIF or CF.
August 27, 2024, sinimulan ng House Committee on Appropriations ang pagdinig sa 2025 budget ng Office of the Vice President. Dito, nagtanong na rin ang ilang mambabatas sa paggamit ng OVP ng confidential fund.
So according to the utilization of the confidential and intelligence fund submitted by the COA, total of 125 million conducted surveillance in 132 areas in 11 days. So 100% utilization.
I will forgo the opportunity to defend the budget of the Office of the Vice President through a question and answer. And I will leave it to the House to decide on the budget submitted.
Since ayaw magpaliwanag ang BP, so ibig sabihin nito, yung paggastos ng 125 million ay na pera ng taong bayan ay hindi maipaliwanag. Hindi pwede yung ganyan na yung tactics na ganyan na parang parang sorry for the pusit, na kapag nasusukol na ang pusit ay nagaano ng maitim na tinta. So ayaw natin ng ganun, Madam Chair, kasi yung atin namang pinag-uusapan dito ay budget.
I request that the chairperson of the Finance Committee preside over this hearing.
With due respect, you are not allowed to do that. This is about transparency and accountability, and it doesn't exempt the office of the Vice President.
Natapos ang pagdinig nang hindi naresolba ang mga katanungan sa Confidential and Intelligence Fund.
She may not like my answer. She may not like how I answer. She may not like the content of my answer. But I am answering.
September 10, 2024, sa ikalawang budget briefing ng Committee on Appropriations, walang dumalo mula sa Office of the Vice President.
Madam Chair, so ibig sabihin wala po ni isa na dumating from the Office of the Vice President para sumagot ng mga tanong ng ating mga colleagues, Madam Chair. That is correct. But Madam Chair, she is accountable to the people and she has this sworn duty to the Constitution, being the head of the agency, to be here.
September 18, 2024, nagbukas ng investigasyon ang House Committee on Good Government and Public Accountability. Dumalo si Vice President SARAH Duterte, gayunman.
Ang nasa rules ninyo, witnesses lang po ang nag-o-oath. Wala po kayong rules sa resource persons.
Please your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the statements you will give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, help you God?
Di rin niya tinapos ang pagdinig.
I request to leave the inquiry.
Ma'am, pwede naman po, considering na hindi naman din po kayo naka-oath and alam naman po namin marami rin po kayong ginagawa. The Vice President is excused.
September 25, 2024, hindi dumalo ang Vice Presidente sa pangalawang araw ng investigasyon kung saan lumabas ang ilang aligasyon.
In fiscal year 2023, the OVP received ₱500 million pesos in confidential funds. Sa 500 million po, halos 10% lamang po ang pinayagan ng COA. Paulit-ulit po at parang kinapi-paste ang liquidation ng confidential funds ng OVP. Ano po yung laman nitong siyam na envelope na to?
It's 50,000 pesos. I-turn over ko na yung envelope. The envelopes where the money was. It says hope and the amount is there.
October 17, muling hindi sumipot ang top officials ng DepEd. Napilitan ng mga kongresista na isabi na ang mga ito. Lumabas muli sa hearing ang questionabling paggamit ng confidential funds ng OVP.
In 11 days, ang nagastos po nila sa safe houses is 16 million.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
November 5, 2024, sa panlimang pagkakataon, hindi sumipot ang mga dating opisyal ng OVP at DepEd sa hearing.
612.5 million ang kabuuang halaga ng confidential fund ang ibinigay sa OVP and DepEd sa loob ng 2 taon.
Nabunyag naman ang mga kahinahinalang acknowledgement receipts na isnumite ng OVP at DepEd.
The name Woodreed, tama po ba? Mary Grace Piatos. Sa tingin mo, totoong tao yan?
November 11, 2024, apat lamang sa 9 na inimbitahang opisyal ng OVP at DepEd ang sumipot sa pagdinig. 4 sa kanila na cite in contempt.
The testimony of Zulaika Lopez is so crucial on this investigation. They can always run, but they cannot hide anymore, Mr. Chairman.
November 20, 2024, mas lumalim ang naging pagsuri sa acknowledgement receipts, partikular ang kay Mary Grace Piatos at Kokoy Villamin. Naditin na naman ang dating Chief of Staff ni Duterte sa DepEd na si Zulaika Lopez.
But I need my lawyers to be present.
November 25, 2024, pinalawig pa ng 5 araw ang contempt order laban kay Lopez.
I move, Mr. Chair, that the period of detention of Attorney Lopez be 10 days instead of 5 days.
You need to reconsider that extension of your detention. It was illegal in the first place.
Naglisa si Acosta tungkol sa proseso ng encashment at disbursement ng confidential funds ng OVP hanggang sa humiling na itong matingnan ng doktor dahil sa kanyang presyon.
We excuse Gina Acosta para po ma-check po siya.
I understand,
Mas
Mr. Chair.
sa clinic.
Nagpaalam na rin si Duterte at nangakong dadalo sa susunod na pagdinig ng komite.
Gina Acosta was rushed to the emergency rooms. May I ask permission to join her? Okay. I'll join you in the next hearing. Thank you.
Ngayong Lunes, gaganapin ang pagdinig ng House Committee on Good Government and Public Accountability sa paggamit ng confidential fund ng Office of the Vice President at
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Just taking off from where Congressman Acop started. But before that, I would like to start by saying that this has been one of the most fruitful committee hearings that I've had the pleasure in joining. Throughout the course of 7 hearings, we have brought detail to some long-held suspicions, the confidential funds of the OVP and DepEd that had been abused or malversed or maybe even taken. By abused, I mean that the relevant officers of the OVP and the DepEd took advantage of gaps in and in fact violated Joint Circular 2015-001. Mahirap po na problema ito. Pera po ng taong bayan ang pinag-uusapan dito, and unless we are aware of these gaps and violations, the legal regime cannot and will not change for the better. Today, I'd like to go through some of these violations as mentioned by Congressman Acop. The SDO has the sole mandate to disburse the CF, the confidential funds, and to prepare and submit the liquidation reports of cash advances with the relevant supporting documentation as prescribed under the Joint Circular. Siya lamang. On the other hand, a security officer is a personnel who has been officially designated as such to have access to security information. Klaro po ang kani-kanilang mga responsibilidad. Ang SDO po ang sa disbursement o ang sa pagbibigay ng pera. Ang SO naman, yung security officer naman, ay binibigyan lamang ng access sa impormasyon. To elaborate and para po sa kaalaman ng lahat, under the Joint Circular, the SDO is personally tasked with the disbursement and liquidation of confidential funds. Ang SDO ang tagabigay ng pera, siya lang under the Joint Circular. Natural lang po ito dahil ang SDO ang isa sa mga accountable officers or those public officers personally accountable when something goes wrong with respect to the utilization or disbursement of these confidential funds. And this is precisely the reason why kinakailangan may fidelity bond ang SDO. The fidelity bond is there so that if anything happens to the funds while it is in the custody of the SDO, sigurado na may maibabalik pa rin na pondo to the government through the bond and for the security of the taxpayers. Yung head of agency is also personally tasked to oversee the agency-wide use and disposition of confidential funds. Siya rin ang nag-a-appoint ng SDO. Because of the functions that burden the head of agency is also an accountable officer. Sa makatuwid, yung SDO po yung inaatasan ng batas natin na humawak at siguraduhin mapunta ang confidential funds sa naaayon na confidential expenses allowed under the Joint Circular. Hindi niya pwedeng i-delegate ang custody ng confidential funds dahil siya ang mananagot rito. Hindi niya pwedeng iutos sa iba. Hindi pwedeng ibigay sa security officer. In the case of SDO Edward Fajardo of the DepEd, while he has admitted to having encashed the 3 checks amounting to 37.5 million pesos each, he has also claimed that he did not know or had no way of knowing how the funds were to be utilized after handing them over to the designated security officer. Mr. Fajardo stated that since it was Colonel Nolasco who is the expert in confidential operations, it was Colonel Nolasco who supposedly made the disbursements of the confidential funds in different localities. It begs the question, sino po ba ang totoong special disbursing officer? Kung ang nag-iisang taong pinagdi-disperse ng SDO ay si Colonel Nolasco, kung pagka-encash ng cheque ay agara naman itong inaabot sa security officer. Whatever happened to Mr. Fajardo being an accountable officer under the Joint Circular? Kung wala siyang slightest idea kung saan napupunta o kanino ibinibigay ang confidential funds? Is his role in this entire process simply ministerial? We beg to disagree. Mr. Fajardo is not just a simple bagman that would withdraw the funds and turn over to the security officer. His role, as material as it is, carries with it discretion. Discretion to ensure the accuracy of the data in the liquidation reports and to be accountable for the disbursements from the cash advances of confidential funds. But Mr. Fajardo admitted that he merely relied on the documents evidencing payments submitted by the security officer. His failure to exercise the standard care and diligence required of and inherent in his function is the height of irresponsibility and is in clear violation of his mandate under the Joint Circular. At bakit po nangyari ito? Dahil ito raw ang sabi ng head of agency ng DepEd doon na si VP Sara na ibigay ang pera sa security officer. Same case po tayo with SDO Gina Acosta of the OVP. Ms. Acosta also admitted that the utilization and payment of the confidential funds involves her handing over the money to a security officer per the instruction of no less than head of the agency, Vice President Duterte. SDO Acosta also supposedly never knew where the security officer took or expended the confidential funds. She has only testified on the basis of the information supposedly fed to her, without certainty as to who are the actual recipients or payees of the confidential funds, whether they are even actual persons. In the past hearings, it has always been made to appear that Ms. Acosta for OVP and Mr. Fajardo for DepEd would have the most knowledge as the SDOs of the confidential funds. And we have always been made to believe that it would be the two of them who would be able to shed light on the discrepancies flagged by the COA and the other erroneous and false matters po na didiscover po namin through these hearings. Unfortunately, the SDOs themselves violated their own accountability, their own certifications in the liquidation report. With them disclaiming knowledge kung saan or kanino ba talaga pumunta ang bawat sentimo ng confidential funds, they violated a particular responsibility under item 4.15.1 of the Joint Circular, where they are supposed to certify at least 2 things: na sila ang accountable for the disbursements of confidential funds, and that the expenses were incurred in connection with the agency's confidential activities. How can they faithfully attest to these confidential funds sa ibang tao or as evidenced by the acknowledgement receipts recorded for that date? Hindi ka paniwala for one person designated as the SDO to have made disbursements in Malolos, Bulacan, Danao, Cebu, San Francisco, Agusan del Sur, Makati City, Negros Occidental, Negros Oriental, and Davao City, all in one receipts of the same date, but varied widely in terms of the localities where the payments were made. Plotting these on the Philippine map, within a single day on March 15, 2023, there were 26 disbursements which were made across 24 localities from Batanes to Davao del Sur, with total confidential expenses amounting to 1,870,000 pesos. On the 9th of March 2023, the DepEd, supposedly through its SDO, was able to make 20 disbursements over 18 localities all over the Philippines, with disbursements of confidential funds amounting to more than 1,400,000 pesos. And lastly, on February 25, 2023, there were 21 disbursements across 18 localities all over the country amounting to almost 1,400,000 pesos. All three examples reinforce our point that no amount of imagination can make us believe that these disbursements were made to these people at these locations and at these dates. It is physically impossible. Even assuming that the DepEd has its satellite offices and field personnel all over the country, we should always go back to the joint circular as our Bible. The function of disbursing and of being accountable for the cash advances of the confidential funds is lodged with the SDO and the SDO alone. Delegating this function to any other officer or employee would run counter to the express guidelines of the joint circular and the safeguards that it entails. Unsurprisingly, the same discrepancies have been observed in the OVP acknowledgement receipts, particularly for the payouts and disbursements for the fourth quarter of 2022. For everyone's recollection, this period refers to the 11 days when the OVP was able to use up 125 million pesos worth of confidential funds. And markedly, there were at least 3 days out of those 11 days that the payouts reached 100 recipients. For instance, noon pong December 23, 2022, based on the records and the AR submitted by the OVP to the COA, SDO Gina Acosta was able to disburse more than 15 million pesos to 103 distinct individuals for various purposes. Tila po ba naka-hyperdrive na ang naging pag-disburse ni SDO Acosta para siguruhing ma-expend ang allocated confidential funds sa OVP sa mga nalalabing araw ng 2022. Notably, the following day or Christmas Eve of 2022, these disbursements continued based on the 40 acknowledgement receipts from the OVP on this date. It spent a total of 5,429,000 pesos on supposed confidential activities. Grabe talaga itong OVP non-stop kahit magpapasko na. Whoever disbursed more than 5 billion pesos truly embodied the spirit of generosity during the holidays. If it was actually true, this amount was disbursed for confidential expenses. Lastly, we found acknowledgement receipts that the OVP reported and submitted for the fourth quarter of 2022, but bear dates outside the period for which they are intended to be used as proof. Na-observe po namin how the OVP fourth quarter acknowledgement receipts were dated December 2023, when they have been supposedly paid out to and received by the recipients in 2022. Understandably, a person can instinctively write the past year in documents when welcoming a new year. But we find it very eccentric po, kasi for a person writing a date in 2022 and mistakenly indicating the immediately succeeding year, 2023, wala po yata ibang reason dito except that the acknowledgement receipts were indeed executed in 2023 and not in 2022, contrary to what the OVP is trying to establish. Sa dami po nang nadiscover natin in the past hearings na sinubaybayan po ng publiko, we uncovered irregularities and deficiencies in the disbursements and reporting of the confidential funds allocated to the OVP and to the DepEd. This has been an extremely insightful exercise of our mandate as we were able to examine the sufficiency of our current legislation and how this current legislation safeguards us from potential misuse and abuse of public funds, as well as the potential malfeasance, misfeasance, and nonfeasance in the office by officers and employees of the government. Our task does not end here. It is now our duty to craft legislation that will protect the public coffers and ensure that they are not used and abused by public servants for their personal agenda. With that, Mr. Chair, I conclude my part of the hearing. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Congressman Gutierrez. Next is Congressman Zia Alonto Adjong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Mr. Chairman and fellow members of this honorable committee, to my fellow Filipinos who are watching right now, what we have witnessed in the past 7 hearings before This Committee on Good Government and Public Accountability of the House of Representatives has left us with more questions than answers. Ang mga tanong po natin dito, hindi nakukuha ang kakulang sagot. Bagkus, nanganganak pa ng maraming tanong. But one thing, Mr. Chairman, is extremely clear to this representation. Tayo po ay na-scam sa pamamagitan ng libu-libong acknowledgement receipts na basta-basta lamang dinoktor or gawa-gawa lamang. Mr. Chair, almost 5,000 acknowledgement receipts of dubious origin, kapalit ang 612.5 million pesos na confidential funds na basta-basta lang naglaho mula sa kaban ng bayan sa ilalim ng pamumuno ng ating Vice Presidente. Mr. Chair, 612,500,000 pesos o mahigit kalahating bilyon. Mr. Chair, ito po ang pondo ng bayan na nawala o hindi ma-explain mula lamang December 2022 hanggang September 2023. 9 na buwan lamang po, Mr. Chairman. Sa ganitong halaga, halos budget na po ng isang buong ahensya para sa isang buong taon ang pinag-uusapan po dito. Pinaglaruan po tayo? Niloko ho ba tayo? O pinaglaruan po ang publiko pagdating sa kanilang pondo? Mr. Chairman, sa item 4.12 ng Joint Circular, ang requirement po sa government agencies na nagdi-disperse ng confidential funds is to submit documentary evidence of payment upon the liquidation at the end of the period for which it was allocated. These documents, Mr. Chairman, are to be submitted to the Intelligence and Confidential Fund Audit Unit of the Commission of Audit, who shall then audit these documents. In fact, upon the submission of the liquidation report to ICFAO, a certification signed by the head of agency and its Special Disbursement Officer, or SDO, stating that the expenses were incurred in connection with the agency's confidential expenses and activities with supporting documents and documentary evidence of payment is needed, Mr. Chairman. As the name suggests, evidence, ebidensya,